In this lecture, we will talk about atypical neurodevelopment and signs for early detection and diagnosis. So from early on as infant development, we can observe a variety of reflexes that a baby is born with. So there's the grasping reflex, where the baby can hold on to certain objects and hold a tight grip on them. Sucking and rooting reflexes that allow for proper breastfeeding. Absences, delays, or difficulties with these reflexive responses can serve as early signs for atypical development. Another important aspect to consider is that certain reflexes are expected to disappear by a certain age or stage. So if they persist for a longer period of time, that may be indicative of nervous system issues. Another important aspect that can be used to test for atypical neurodevelopment is auditory brainstem responses, which are used to measure an infant's hearing sensitivity levels based on their nervous system responses to auditory stimuli. So here is an example of how auditory information can be processed throughout the brain. So it is received initially in the auditory nerves, and it travels through the spinal cord and the brainstem all the way to the auditory cortex. And here's an example of what the nervous system responses may look like as the signal travels from the spinal cord, from the ears through the spinal cord, the brainstem, and to the brain. And studies have shown how altered ABR responses can be useful for detecting neurodevelopmental derailment. There are also aspects of an infant or a child's motor development that can serve as early signs for neural derailment. At an early stage, we can expect infants to wiggle their limbs or lift their neck. As they grow a few months older, they're expected to be able to roll over or sit unsupported. And then they gradually transition to crawling, reaching for certain objects, standing unsupported, and eventually walking. So it is important for us to consider the time it takes for a child to reach each of these milestones. And if there are prolonged delays in reaching each of these stages, that can be indicative of neurodevelopmental derailment. Throughout a child's development, we can also observe their progress in terms of speech and language. So language is one of the most complex processes that takes several years to develop. But from an early stage, we can expect infants to turn their attention to certain sounds or voices, to begin babbling or imitate certain vocalizations, remember the names of other individuals until they're able to produce understandable speech. So any speech delays can also serve as important indicators for atypical neurodevelopment. Another key feature that can be used to assess atypicalities can be emotional expression and regulation, how often the child expresses positive or negative affect, such as smiling, laughing, or sadness and fear. And eventually this can influence how they reciprocate social interactions or cooperate with other individuals. And then lastly, we have social interaction, which at the initial stages can begin with simple eye contact, waving to other individuals, maintaining mutual gaze. And then as the child grows older, they're expected to engage in activities such as parallel play, taking turns, sharing, and eventually communicating with other children, engaging in role play or pretend play, as well as contingent social exchanges. To conclude, aspects of neurodevelopmental derailment can be detectable as early on as the newborn stage, where we may observe differences in the timing of certain reflexes, ABR tests can be used as screeners for early neurodevelopmental derailment. And then during child development, we can take a look at possible motor and speech delays or impediments, difficulties with emotion regulation and social interaction, as well as a variety of sensory sensitivities that the child may exhibit. And we will go into more details about sensory sensitivities in the next lecture. That is all for this lecture. Thank you so much for listening.